Hi, everybody. This is Lauren Baker, founder of Search Engine Journal, and thank you for attending today's SEJ webinar with Jordan Cooney of Search Metrics. Hey, Jordan, how's it going?
Good, Lauren. How you doing?
Good, good. So thanks for all of you that got in a little bit early. We're about to kick things off, but before Jordan gets started, and Jordan, now's a perfect chance to hop over to your first slide, just to make sure we have that there and working. There we go. So before Jordan gets started, I just want to go over some basic housekeeping here at SEJ and give some of the late stragglers a chance to kind of log on and get ready for today's webinar. So again, Jordan is the SEO strategist and advisor at Search Metrics, a company that I've utilized quite a bit in the past, and I'm looking forward to the amazing data and tips that Jordan has today. Today's official hashtag is hashtag SEJwebinar. So please feel free to take any screen captures and share what you're learning out there on Twitter or LinkedIn or other social media channels, and let everybody know what they're missing out on at the moment. Speaking of missing out, just a reminder, the video along with slides and a general recap will be made available after the webinar itself. Plus, Jordan has a nice awesome URL shortener at the end for all of you to just jump on that almost immediately. So that's going to be made available, and we're going to be recapping the webinar after a few days in email and on SEJ. Of course, SEJ webinar registrants get first dibs of the video and slides. Also, we will be doing Q&A. We'll have a Q&A section at the end of the webinar, but ask questions as they come up while Jordan is presenting. We'll be asking and answering some of the questions that are specific to the slides, which pop up during the presentation, and then saving some other questions for the end. So please, please, please feel free to ask. And then also, and I can't stress this enough, we'll be launching 2 polls during today's webinar. We try to get about 80% of you answering. So these polls are really short and sweet. Take the time to go ahead and answer. Not only does it help Jordan get great information on who is attending today's webinar, but it can also help craft our overall delivery and Q&A to get a better idea of the audience that we're talking to. And Jordan, I think that's everything from a housekeeping perspective. Are you ready to go?
Yeah, Lauren, let's do it.
All right, let's get going.
Cool. Thanks, Lauren. Appreciate it. And thank you for attending today. I'm really excited to share some insights on what's happened in 2021 around SEO. As Lauren mentioned, Jordan Cooney, I'm an advisor to Search Metrics, and I've been in the search space supporting various brands. I spent 6 years at eBay, worked on sites, big sites before that, and really just a passionate person about the SEO space, always have been and always will be. So a little bit about what we're going to cover today. We're going to go through the 3 ways that SEO has changed this year. And really, I want to dive into why it matters to everybody on our webinar today. And then more importantly, like, what do we need to do to create growth in this new dynamic, in this new world that we're facing around SEO? As many of you probably know, Google has been far more vocal in the last 2 to 3 years, and particularly this year, they've been very forward about changes and improvements, or quote unquote improvements, that they've made to the search. So there's 3 areas that I want to focus on, all of which that Google has made public statements about, but more importantly, I want to dive into how we look at these not only at Search Metrics, but more broadly as an SEO community. The first one is really around MUM and what MUM means to all of us in the search space. So MUM is the multitask unified model, which is an AI model that helps Google handle text-to-text transformation. That's a lot of mumbo jumbo around basically Google's able to process and understand text and what the meaning of a page is faster than ever before. We'll talk about that a little bit more as we dive in. We're going to talk about the changing rules of the SERP. So the SERP has been changing a lot over the last decade, but we're really seeing an accelerated amount of influence from Google around what is happening on the SERP. And then we're going to dive into, lastly, really the idea of performance. And we've heard now for 3 to 4 years from Google that core web vitals, site performance, speed is going to be a big factor of success. But interestingly enough, just being faster doesn't always mean you're a winner. And so we're going to dive into that and understand that a little bit better. So before we get started, let's talk a little bit about let's do a poll question here. So Lauren, if you want to, I don't know how you send this out to the folks, but basically the poll question we have is, what is the biggest Google change in 2021? I have 3 examples here: Google title change, the core updates that we've seen so far, and then also the Google page experience update. And then if you have any other changes, Google's made many. So go ahead and put that in.
Yeah, so the poll's running right now. I see that 50% of our attendees have voted thus far. So I'll give you all a couple more seconds to get up to that 80% plus level. Again, what is the biggest change in Google in 2021 so far? The title change, Google's core update, and the Google page experience update, and then also other events. If you do fill in other events, please feel free to write what you think that event is in the question box itself. That gives us an idea of what all of you are thinking might be other events outside of core, page experience, and title. So we have about 75% of you have voted thus far. We're going to shut things down in a second, Jordan. So let me give everyone a final chance to go ahead. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, shutting down and closing the poll now and sharing the results. So according to our audience today, Jordan, the Google Core Update came in as the biggest change on the Google side in 2021, 49%. Then Google Page Experience Update at 39%. Google Title Change at 11%, a little bit smaller. And then other events, 0. And nothing else has come in from the other events side. So any thoughts on those answers, with Core leading the pack, Page Experience, and then Title Change?
No, that's actually really fascinating, and thank you for participating. I mean, first of all, the core updates have been just kind of a whack-a-mole of events, right? So I mean, the first thing is that we've had back-to-back core updates in the summer months, a lot more activity than other years where we've kind of had them more spread out throughout the course of the year. So I'm not surprised to see that being number 1. It's interesting to see page experience number 2. I know this title change is pretty recent and new, but I think overall the pace at which Google is making these changes is really what's interesting. The magnitude of them and at the pace this year is really faster than what we've seen in previous years, and it really goes to the testament of the first point about change, which is this MUM update and how not MUM update, excuse me, how MUM as a technology, as a asset that Google now has to process information, allows them to make decisions way faster.
Jordan,
go ahead, Lauren.
Quick,
Yeah.
I think your screen is still stuck on the quick poll preview. Not sure why. If you can try maybe changing the display.
Huh.
I haven't had that happen before, so.
Here's what I'll do. I'll just stop sharing.
There you go.
And I will resume sharing here. How about that?
We're back.
Cool. We're back. Sorry about that, everybody. So again, what I was just alluding to is kind of how MUM has helped Google make so many changes this year. I encourage all of our listeners and viewers to go and read this awesome article on the AI blog of Google that talks about T5. T5 is essentially this whole artificial intelligence, and how Google can process information at such a faster pace around text. And it really goes into detail around how text-to-text transformation, which is basically all these technologies that we hear about, like GPT-3 and NLP, and like all these technologies and how Google's actually been able to develop ways to process information both from a language perspective, like a multi-language perspective, or even from a meaning and intent. So like how one word has a similar meaning to another word. And this is really what is so fascinating about where MUM has come this year. And when Google announced this earlier this year, what MUM has done for all of us in the SEO space is it's really force functioned us to move at a much faster pace. And that's really what I want everyone to gravitate towards. But I want to transition here and talk a little bit about why is this at all important? Why is these changes in the search landscape evolution important to us? And here's why. By Google's own accord, the reason why MUM and technologies like MUM are important at Google is because it advances their ability to have an impact on businesses. And this is data from Google's own studies, their economic impact studies, where the number of US businesses from 2018 to 2020 has grown. And we currently have around 32 million US businesses that exist. But of the businesses that exist in the US, only 17 million, or about roughly half of the businesses out there, benefit from Google services. This is everything: Google My Business. This is services like obviously native Google search. YouTube is included in this number, but it's basically any company that benefits from Google. And of all of these businesses, only 2 million, right? Less than 10% actually benefit from Google Ads. So one of the major reasons why Google is accelerating the pace and the speed at which they do these changes is largely because they want to reach more businesses. And I'm going to come to a point later on in this presentation where I talk about why this is so important for us to reflect on, because ultimately, for many of us in the SEO space, the race, the chase to get more traffic isn't necessarily about focusing on more and more keywords. The chase is likely going to evolve to making the keywords we already rank for more performant. And I think that's an important note for everyone to just remember. A couple of really interesting studies about this evolution, this change, right? And I think this is really interesting how Google is displaying this, which is when we look at topics like live events are seeing like monumental year-over-year growth. Obviously, last year we had this pandemic, and we were still living through this evolving door of what's happening within our physical world, but also what's happening online. But we're seeing like things like concerts, and we're seeing concepts like shows and different types of shows near me seeing massive accelerated year-over-year growth. And this is kind of one of these concepts where I'm getting at the point of like, what keyword are we really focused on, and how are we actually generating traffic and awareness from that keyword? Other live events like stadium seatings and live music, we're seeing massive year-over-year growth in these particular terms and keywords. And the idea of showcasing these examples to you is to reflect on the fact that the performance of an individual set of terms, of an individual topic, is far more impactful today than our ability to go and secure more traffic from more keywords. The same is happening when it comes to shopping concepts, right? Shopping concepts like what's open now. And I did an amazing study around open now and just that whole philosophy and how that's changed over the pandemic. It's really interesting because it's very contradictory. What you would normally think would be a growth vehicle during the pandemic, which is outdoor dining. So like, let's see like outdoor dining grow and see an acceleration during the pandemic because everybody's going to eat outside, and then dine in. They're actually inverse of what you would think. Everyone would have thought that outdoor dining would just see this massive acceleration, but the reality is that the constrictive restraint for consumers is indoor dining experiences because nobody could indoor dine, and it was restricted in many states. And so understanding these search patterns in these year-over-year growth scenarios is one of the things that I want us to all reflect on as a new data point, as a new useful data point in how we manage our search expectations. And the fact of the matter is that Google is processing the information of what pages and what content to show at a much faster pace. So we'll take a quick pause here and do another poll. Again, this poll is looking at really during this pandemic year, how has the pandemic, and related events impacted your search traffic? Has it impacted your search traffic negatively, positively, or has it really been no change? Lauren?
Yeah, so the poll's running. A good amount of you have voted already. So please go ahead and vote right now. A couple of things that stuck out to me on these slides, Jordan, is that one, it's really hard for me to like grasp that almost half of US businesses are not benefiting from Google in any way. Like
Mm-hmm.
as an SEO, we're in the weeds all the time, and just thinking that there's businesses that are not necessarily benefiting or actively marketing or even doing paid just blows me away with all of the results that we've been able to see right over the years.
Yep.
And then the second thing is that to your point about indoor dining and outdoor dining being almost the opposite of what you would think it would be from a trend perspective, one thing that stuck out to me in your slides was the open now component, right? Because during a lot of lockdowns in the pandemic, what I found was that a company's Google My Business page may have the previous hours before they adjusted for capacity or lockdown. Then maybe on the site, they've have an announcement about the hours or something. And then when you get there in real life and the hours are completely different on the door
Yeah.
because of so that makes complete sense from that perspective. So we've had 75% of you have voted. Let's go ahead and do a quick countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Get in your final vote right now, and I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results. So how has the pandemic related events impacted your search traffic? 50% of attendees today say positive. So lockdowns, things like that have positively, supply chain have positively affected search traffic. 24% negative, and then 26%, almost the same as negative, no change at all. Any thoughts there?
Wow, that's just honestly, I totally did not expect that. And candidly, it's quite fascinating to see that there's an equal amount of, of our listeners here, of our audience who have seen positive change to basically no or negative change. And I think this is a reflection of how diverse this past year has been and how the most recent set of Google changes in 2021, which is what we're talking about today, how those are quickly changing the landscape and our ability to adapt. And so I think that, I've seen a lot of businesses see like record numbers of growth, record numbers in terms of growth, and really not of any of their own efforts, just the fact that the pandemic and this whole year has really changed the rules of engagement. And then I've seen other businesses just have like total nosedives, but then recover as things change. So I think it's kind of that whack-a-mole scenario that we're living. I don't know, Lauren, what do you think?
Yeah, very similar. The biggest thing that I saw that I've experienced is that during lockdown last year, especially on the e-com component, right? Remember, like it was hard to find almost anything on Amazon for a while, so everyone started buying direct. And then we had the pretty much the growth of the the fast payment buttons, right?
Yeah.
So PayPal, Shop, everything else, I think really helped that. And then now, like in 2021, it seems like businesses are really trying to make or beat those same numbers that they had last year. It's such a weird time right now, especially in e-com from an SEO perspective, because if you beat your forecast by 50%, what do you do the year afterwards when things kind of go back to normal levels? And then how do you control expectations amongst the C-suite, or bubble up those expectations when they had such a great year
Yep.
last year as well? So really interesting time to be in search and to be in marketing as a whole.
Yeah, and we saw that with Amazon's, I think Q2 earnings call, where they had this like lackluster performance as everybody came out of pandemic hibernation. So again, that this whack-a-mole scenario that we're all living.
Yeah, now they're rolling out TVs. So
Right, they got to find something to grow, right? So the next point, right, coming off of this, technological evolution that Google has invested in to move the search space so much faster, and how both collectively this pandemic scenario has amplified this cycle of change. Let's talk a little bit about SERP features and how this has really become Google's literally their biggest asset in changing the landscape. And so I'm just showing a really small snapshot of different SERP features and just these historical volatilities that we see for different featured elements that show up in the SERP, everything from related questions and an uptick in that, to how the knowledge panel has seen certain volatility over time, or how video literally for the better part of 2021 has seen a gradual decline in the influence and the frequency at which Google shows these video carousels and assets within the SERP. Or most recently, especially during this title change that Google has taken control of titles more holistically, they've also subsequently taken heavier dose of control of site links and how they feature site links more universally. Again, back to that in that capability of Google can now take non-branded search queries and really understand where and when to place site links against non-branded search queries, making search site links more prolific across the SERP. The whole concept here around SERP features is really our ability to rethink our brand focus in search. The SERP feature isn't necessarily a prohibitive factor from our ability to gain traffic from search, but really it's our ability to develop new strategies that create automation around processes, whether it be how we leverage FAQs and Google's limitation of the number of FAQs in the SERP, or our ability to optimize our core navigational pages so that we can show up more frequently for a site link. Basically, these 3 points, with the last point being our ability as SEOs and as webmasters to develop faster techniques, build more dynamic content, and leverage engagement signals to then drive SERP feature decision making. These 3 points as a bundle are my real my gift to everybody on this webinar, because I really believe that this is going to be an area where we don't spend a lot of time thinking. We monitor it often, but we don't spend enough time thinking about how we can leverage these assets as a source of traffic and as a source of awareness in Google. Lastly, we have this point around performance. Search metrics, and you can check out this link here. Search metrics, we did a study on across 2 million URLs looking at how performant sites are in Google. And essentially only 4% of the 2 million URLs we analyzed actually performed at a good core web vital score. And the reason I show this is because, quite frankly, we're really sitting in a place where Google has become much more vocal about what the expectations are around core web vitals, but even more importantly, around performance. And simply being the fastest doesn't necessarily mean that you get the most traffic. And I think this is a concept that I'm constantly trying to beat down with individuals who've heard about core web vitals, or developers who I'm working with who are simply fixated on one concept, which is how fast do we make the website, or is it fast enough? The reality is that it's a collective effort, and it's really about building a playbook that takes us from being in this defensive mindset of just being a faster website to an offensive positioning where we're focused on what Google's expectation and the competitive set of requirements necessary to be successful. And the reality is there's some things we can do around this playbook, right? Like, one of them that we should just all be aware of is that there's going to be a lot more volatility around core web vital factors over a shorter period of time. Like, Google has kind of given us this long runway, and the reality is this is only going to speed up, right? And we're still in the midst of a performance update, and Google said towards the end of September, we're going to see kind of a end of August, end of September, we're going to see kind of a finishing of this quote unquote update, but we're going to even see more influence and more change in shorter periods of time. The other thing that I already mentioned is like understanding how we can deliver competitive advantages around performance and experience at an individual page level. I've literally seen websites make optimizations and tweaks, whether it's reduce the number of ads, make a page more performant, optimize images into WebP so that they're more collectively performant for one page, and that one page sees a dramatic increase in the number of keywords and traffic that it ranks for. And then finally, and I think this is the one that we often miss in the SEO space, is using design factors to really figure out experience scores and understand how, whether it's our mobile or even our desktop experiences, have an influence not only on users, but ultimately on how Google might evaluate the site. I was working on a project just a few months ago where the entire header navigation was consumed with a CTA pop-up. And it just seems like common sense, but we often forget in our own ambition to grow users or acquire more sales, whatever it might be, that like that pop-up completely restricts the ability of a user to navigate the whole site because it covered up the entire menu, it covered up the entire search bar, it just blocked everything. Certainly a user could X out of it, but the placement of that seemed completely contradictory to the best practices of what a user would need. So I'll leave our audience with this, and I think from here we can jump into some Q&A. You know, we always focus on this concept of billions and billions and trillions of searches that happen on Google every single day. And the reality is that every day new searches do happen. I mean, according to Google, about 15% of all searches every single day are new to Google and they've never seen them before. But the interesting thing is that this number is radically down from 2012. So nearly 10 years ago, this was 20% of searches were completely new to Google. So the reality is that as search has evolved over the last decade and over the last 2 decades, we must repurpose our focus on understanding our brand, our relevance, and ultimately how our SERP footprint has an impact. And these are the tools we must leverage. I was recently working on a project with this company called Visibly, and you guys can all check them out. And this Visibly company, they're trying to understand what is the brand presence of a website in a SERP. Like how much brand equity, just like when we drive past the highway and we look at a billboard and that billboard knows how many cars drive past that billboard. This company's trying to decode how much brand equity is built in a placement, whether it be in a SERP feature, whether it be a blue link, whether it be in the knowledge graph, whether it be an ad, how much brand relevance is there for that placement. And I think that this is an important strategy for us to start thinking about new techniques in terms of how we evolve our SEO playbooks, our SEO checklists, our SEO strategies, the tickets that we deploy with our engineering teams, and at what granularity are we looking at these tickets and these tasks in order for us to become more effective at producing traffic and growth through SEO. Cool, Lauren, over to you, and let's dive into some Q&A.
Cool, really good stuff, Jordan. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I really like the football comparison, especially with us being one day ahead of opening.
Opening season, yes, sir. That's right.
Yeah, I can't believe it's on a Thursday night, so should be cool. Question for you. So you were discussing Core Web Vitals and getting offensive versus defensive in Core Web Vitals, right? Like actually building out a plan. And then one of your bullet points was what can you do on the page element level, which I thought was really interesting because I feel sometimes a lot of Core Web Vitals are looked at as a global site score. Like, how do I improve this with the CDN, or how do I improve this with deferring rendering or lazy loading or things like that? Could you go a little bit more into looking at Core Web Vitals on a page by page perspective?
Yeah, I mean, one of the fascinating things about just the performance scores around core web vitals, but more importantly, the page level analysis that we often miss the mark on, is that the experience factors on a page have almost equal merits to their rank and traffic impact of the overall core web vitals. So what do I mean by that? So we might have the fastest page on the internet. We might have the slowest page on the internet, but that is only one component of the overall evaluation that Google is placing on that page. The other piece to that is, what is this page doing? What's the ultimate impact or value add that this page is doing for users? And is this page actually delivering the expected output for this particular topic or this particular intent? And so I recently did a project where all we did was take individual pages that were originally intended to be informational pages. Think of like a guide page on how to buy a barbecue grill, right? And it was a guide page on how to buy a barbecue grill. There was no CTA on the page to buy a barbecue grill. There was no affiliate links. There was no shopping cart. There was no, here's a list of the 10 barbecue grills you could buy. And by simply repositioning this informative piece of asset that was intended originally for informative type content to include transactional assets on the page, aka include a link to where you can buy these products, the improvement in performance went up dramatically, largely due to the fact that the page was ranking for more keywords, was able to be more performant for the keywords it was already ranking for. And so the point I'm trying to make here is repositioning our efforts from just being faster to understanding the experience of the page and what elements you need in order for that page to be more performant, and testing these. Sometimes you're wrong in some of these assumptions. Testing these over time is absolutely a critical missing piece to all of our core web vital stories, because all of our core web vital stories today are about largely one thing: make images smaller, make the page faster, improve the CDN or some other server-based element to make this page just lightning fast, which is important, but it's only half the story.
So you can make the page faster from a tech perspective, but the ability to give the user or the searcher what they're looking for, right, faster, also helps. And if you're not giving them what they're looking for, then you may not compete long term anyway. I'm glad you bring up the informational to transactional funnel.
Yeah.
It's definitely a huge trend in Google right now. Like, I kind of mean this halfway jokingly, but Google has become a great search engine for finding affiliate lists of, of top 10, top 13, top 15 from various different magazines and publications. So I don't know if that's always going to be that way, but it's definitely something to learn from, because I think historically, a lot of content strategy has been about informing while giving that subtle call to action. But then if you search for a lot of these listings within Google, or just like go through what's ranking, you'll find that the calls to action are not as subtle anymore. So that's a really good tip about like getting an idea of what your true competition is. And true competition meaning it's not necessarily the other company that's selling a product similar to what you sell. Sometimes your competition can very well be the media outlet that's putting together a piece that
Yeah.
has products similar to what you sell.
Yeah.
So two very different things there.
Yeah.
Here's an interesting question that came through about one of your slides on SERP features. Some SERP features tend to come and go. We saw some various drops over the past year with a number of these, and specifically recently with FAQ snippets reducing within Google results, and then also linked featured snippets reducing within Google results. Should SEOs be actively chasing SERP features if they end up going away over time? And then what's a way to speed that up? I think you had talked about getting this into your overall like standard operating procedure, but what are some ways to really speed this up and be able to forecast the ability to jump on top of search features even before they happen or as they're growing?
Man, this is a phenomenal question. Lots to unpack in this question, but the first piece that I want to echo is you're absolutely right. SERP features are changing at a ridiculous rate. Things drop out, things come in, things move really fast, and that is why this second bullet point, and that is why I'm coming back to this slide around automation, is absolutely critical. The concepts for which we want to play at scale in SERP features are only achievable if we can automate ways for us to control and manage the assets necessary to be successful in a SERP feature. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, take this recent Google change around FAQs and the number of FAQs that they're going to showcase on one of your rankings. They're limiting it down to 2. Well, in order for a company to be super successful in driving more awareness to those, we must now better understand how or why is Google selecting those 2, which may seem like there's no rhyme or reason to it, especially when you're looking at the SERP. But as you unpack that in an automated way, and you can manage that in a scalable way, and building processes around testing to removing some on certain pools and doing basically A/B or cohort testing to see how one cohort of pages with 2 FAQs versus another cohort of pages with 5 FAQs versus another cohort of pages with a very hand-selected set of FAQs performs, can then help predicate how you can build faster, right? Point number 3, because now I know which cohort works best in terms of showing me results in Google, and thus I can implement that across more and more of my pages moving forward. So the ultimate concept that I want our listeners to grasp from this is really start to think about some of these automated processes. And I don't necessarily say, I'm not saying that we have to go build these massive experimentation platforms or some crazy like tools to do this. Like, this can be managed in spreadsheets on small websites doing tests on very specific pages. Back to the point earlier, Lauren, from the first question, is like, how do we do things at a page level? Here's an example. You can take really small pools of pages. I recently did a test with a project of mine where the site has tens of thousands of web pages, but the reality is we just wanted to test like 20 of them to see what happens. And we actually got a positive outcome in terms of click-through rate on that pool of pages from this recent Google title change. And we were able to then influence how we predicate titles across all of our pages by repositioning the way we use the brand of the company in the title. And so again, taking these small, automation processes and then figuring out how to build faster and implement those across the site won't just help you with SERP features, but also help you learn faster to then implement across other changes that you want to do on the site, whether they be technical changes, content changes, in-page, on-page changes. H1s, for example, now are becoming a far more important driver than before. And so these are just a few examples, and I know I'm giving a lot of information for this question, but obviously this question was very, very far-reaching in terms of its coverage.
Yeah, I would just add to that, like, mark up whatever you can with schema markup on your pages. Like, don't leave a stone unturned if you have the opportunity to define something that's easier to find to Google through a feed rather than them depending on a crawl to identify it. And then that way you can also, and also make sure your schema matches up with what's on your site and what's on third parties as well, obviously. But the more you can do that, the better. Like, I honestly don't know many people that had FAQ schema markup on a page by page level before that rollout. Most were only on their like FAQ page, and then someone saw that like if they put it on a normal page, that would appear. And then of course, no, we're star-based niches, right? So one person does it, then we all do it, right? That's just how SEO works.
Yes.
So, so the ability to not only test, but to define what you can you know, if it's location pages, it's service area markup, if it's other pages. You know, you just talked about how important H1s have gotten. Everything I seem to be hearing about right now is H1s and then internal linking, right?
Mm.
So as this kind of bubbles up, just to Jordan's point, make sure you test and everything else. So thank you. Thank you for getting into that as well. I had a couple questions that came in about your statement of um, make the key, instead of, from a growth perspective, instead of just chasing new keywords, to go ahead and work on making your current keywords rank higher, or get more out of your current keywords. Besides
Mm.
user intent or you know, markup or changes to work better with Google snippets, what are some other ways that people can get more out of the keywords that they have, or more out of the pages that they have, so they're not as dependent upon always growing new things, but more so developing those roots that you've already built over time?
Yeah, this is a great question. And um, right off the bat, typically the biggest one we miss is right under our nose, which is our own branded footprint in the SERP. And I know I worked on a recent effort where community UGC, so just straight up UGC that exists on a branded website, was showing up for site links for that brand, and was generating, I mean, according to Google Search Console, was generating on a monthly basis hundreds of thousands of clicks. So for a branded search term, this company was sending traffic to UGC that they don't even they don't control it. It was produced by one of their community members. And again, like, oftentimes some of the most important factors at how we yield our traffic to our site is sitting right under our nose. So that's number one. Like, I mean, how we can take that focus off of just keywords, but look at, like, holistically, how is our brand showing up in the SERP? And I remember a bunch of years back when I was at eBay, and you know, our CMO would come in and say, like, hey, this knowledge graph is wrong and it's showing like the wrong information about eBay, and this is our old logo, and how do we get our new logo up here, and all this stuff. And you know, at the time, I just was like, that doesn't matter. Who cares about that stuff? You know, that's not how we make our money. And unfortunately, that's not entirely true. Like, today, more importantly than ever before, the way our brand is represented in the SERP matters more so than ever before. And it's just not for unbranded queries, but even for our own branded queries. So that's just something that I want everyone to kind of take away on, and really start to process. And there's some great research and work being done by this Visibly company. I mentioned them before, but I think it's useful from the perspective of, like, how should we think of our brand, right?
Yep.
And then ultimately, secondly, I think instead of thinking about the world from these uh, uh, individual keyword bases, like how we rank better for keyword X versus keyword Y, we should start really refocusing that perspective, again, from my slides, on a page level. So, like, how is one page performing across a community of keywords, and how should we think about classification of those keywords, is something that a lot of SEOs simply aren't doing today. And guess what? Like, search metrics, we do this. We can show you how a page performs at a keyword level. Other tools can do this as well. But the simple truth of the matter is like, understanding what a page's purpose and function is, both from your core business's needs, but then ultimately what's happening in the SERP. That's the best favor you can do your company today. That's the best favor you can do for them every single day in terms of being a better SEO, is understanding how that single page, what the keywords are that it ranks for, what their intention is, classifying them. You can do this work in a spreadsheet, you can do this work with a tool, you can do this work anywhere, but doing this work and then informing the stakeholders, content teams, sometimes you need to work with engineering teams, sometimes you need to work for better internal links, or with your PR team, or just go and promote it on social. just go and try it. One of the things I recently done, and I'll pause here because I know I'm rambling now, but I think Lauren, you might appreciate this one. Like one of the things I've recently done is like just go test Quora ads. Quora now has an ads platform. It's a Q&A based site, so I can be very specific about where I want to be. And I just tested placing ads to see what the impact of subsequent branded searches for that page will be in Google. Crazy. I know that that sounds nuts, but think about it. Quora is a highly engaged community of users. And if they see that ad and they engage with that ad, they click on that page, there's a huge propensity to then go to Google and look for that same asset again in the future. And so I know I went on for a while there, but I'm just throwing out ideas, and hopefully some of these things stick with our audience and possibly tactics that you can try on your site.
That's really interesting. I haven't thought of that, like the informational based advertising component, right? If it's working there, it should work if someone's looking for that within Google as well. And then also another tip to add on to that is there's a lot of tools out there like Full Story, Hotjar, even to an extent Google Analytics, where you can get an idea. You can heat map or take videos of user behavior on a page itself, right? So getting to understand, like, that you're driving people to the page, and then bounce rate it's a good metric to have, but it's not necessarily definitive of what's happening once people are on the page itself. It's very easy for us as SEOs to be like, oh, this page has a bounce rate of 50 and everything else has a bounce rate of 60. Therefore, we have to make something better here. It may not be the case at all. So, but if you can run one of these tools, again, Full Story, Hotjar, Crazy Egg, even Google Analytics, and see what people are doing once they reach that page. How far down are they scrolling? How far down are they scrolling on desktop versus mobile? Are they hitting the back button because there's a lot of words, but not necessarily what they want at the end of the day? Like, are they looking back to that grill example? Are they ultimately looking to buy a grill and making that decision there? Or do they want a history on grills and, back in 2 million BC, the first caveman grilled a piece of meat on top of this, almost like with cooking recipes, right? So
Yep.
just, it's a great way to get an idea of what people are doing once they reach your page, because yeah, you may have secured that top of fold 1, 2, 3, 4 listing now, but how is that going to diminish over time if people aren't finding what they're looking for from that
Yep.
extent? Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I really like the perspective of taking in those analytics and data points, because it brings it back to that component also around performance and web vitals, where it's not just about how fast the page is, which we've heard that from every damn SEO on the planet to this point, but it's also about like where and how your experience is being utilized, right? So like maybe just placing the CTA a little higher, a little lower, a little bit in a different spot, or even including a CTA on this page could be all the difference, right?
Yeah.
It's
And
crazy.
going back to your example about the banner at the top covering up the navigation, which is terrible from a usability perspective, on a mobile device, you can always put a little bar at the bottom of the page while people are scrolling. And a lot of sites will have like their logo there or share this or something like that. That is a great place to put your CTA, right?
Yep.
If you think about it from a desktop perspective, typically if it is a content driven page, as people are scrolling down, you'll have a sticky banner on the right hand side that, as they scroll, it basically follows them or something like that. You can do that in the mobile experience as well, because after a while, people's thumbs start to hurt and they just want to get to what they want to buy. So you're giving them the chance to do that easier, as opposed to expecting them to read everything and then click on a blue link at the end of the day.
That's right.
I had a question. You didn't really get into this that much today's webinar, but we do have, this is an SEO webinar, so we do have questions about links coming up. And you've talked quite a bit about internal linking. In 2021, what do you see key factors are from a link acquisition perspective? Are links still driving intent signals? Is link building still a thing that people should be looking at or focusing on? in search?
Yeah. Boy, Lauren, you asked some meaty questions here, or at least our audience does, right? So the short and the fast of it, the short and fast answer, excuse me, on backlinking from an external backlinking perspective. Never before in my career have I ever seen more pages rank well in Google without any backlinks. So I just want to caveat that right off the bat. Like, there are so many pages that are performant, and I think there's been studies done by this. I think Ahrefs did a study on this. A couple of other, companies have done studies on this where like they literally mention like, hey, there's a lot of pages that have no backlinks and they're, kicking butt, and so that's one thing to just take note of and be mindful of. But backlinks still have a huge amount of influence in our ability to garner faster success. And so I think that that's one thing to keep in mind, is that when a page does have backlink recognition, and I'm using that word very loosely, backlink recognition doesn't just need to be like a pure, follow link from a blog post that is a, uniquely written piece of content. I mean, like, social validation can be a backlink. There can be other media and placement opportunities that can be a good backlink, that can even be paid or sponsored in many cases, but done in the right way. Backlink validation is still a huge source of accelerated growth. And I think that that's the piece that I've come to recognize. Interestingly enough, I'd say that the recent spam update was a good thing. I think that it certainly helped squash out a lot of areas where there was certainly spam, but also just like lucrative opportunities that were being taken advantage of in the SERP. And I don't expect that to stop. I expect Google to probably do hopefully more of that. It had been a long time since Google had done some sort of a spam cleanup, at least a known spam cleanup of backlinks. But long story short, to answer this concept of backlinks, yes, they're still relevant. I've seen more and more performant pages without any backlinks than ever before. So I still fundamentally deep down believe that internal linking matters greatly, especially placements on your homepage matter more so now than ever before. And then lastly, if you want to generate accelerated growth, you need to think about backlink relevance and how you're going to create some sort of awareness from outside sources to generate accelerated growth.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring up the homepage component, because this goes back into like the branded site links and things like that, right? So basically the way that you display your most important pages on the site within your navigation, within natural links within the page, should be reflected in your branded site links, obviously. And those branded site links are usually an indicator of what Google really feels are the most important components of the site that back up the company, back up the brand, what the company is selling, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Secondly, all of your links do not have to point to the pages that you want to rank, right? Especially like the quote unquote money pages. Like, trying to build an arsenal of links or naturally acquire links to money pages. By money pages, I mean pages that like sell products, or pages that like, where the transaction is happening, is a lot more difficult, and can be a lot more difficult than acquiring links to great content, than acquiring links to studies, to surveys, to press worthy components and studies that you put out there, links to your homepage, et cetera. And then it's a question of, to your point, Jordan, of funneling that value or crafting the user experience so those most linked components of the site then send that equity to those quote unquote money pages via your internal linking. So then you can have something like featured products on the sidebar. Those products are probably the most important ones that you want, that convert, right? That you want to rank for. So whatever you can do to generate those really natural, powerful links to the really the section of your site that people should be linking to anyway, and then funnel that down to those pages is really helpful. That gets into one more question, and probably one of the
Sure.
final questions for today. We
Yeah.
have talked a lot about, you have discussed internal linking quite a bit, as well as, oh, we just had a bunch just pop up. Internal linking, as well as H1s. Why did H1s become more important, especially in the past couple of weeks?
Oh boy. Yeah, that's a really fascinating question. Um, Personally, I just want to kick Google for this one because I'm not a huge fan of the title the efforts that they've taken upon themselves. I think it's a foolish endeavor on their behalf to try to yield what the messaging should be for a company or a brand and rewrite that. And I think that they're going to get it wrong more often than right, in my opinion. But I'll take my opinion off the table a little bit and let's just talk about the facts, right? Like the facts of the matter stand that H1s were always super relevant and important in terms of Google's ability to crawl and understand the intention of a particular page. Like, what is this page about, right? And so that's just always been a clear signal that they've always used. However, now in a world where Google is essentially taking and decoupling the simplicity of a meta title and how it shows up in the SERP, Google needs other content influences to really shape or reshape the way that they want to message the title in the SERP. And this actually goes really neatly to our first point around MUM and the entire category or sector of T5. T5 is all of these different technologies that allow us to do text-to-text transformation, right? So this is the ability to do things like GPT-3 and have, you know, essentially machine learning and AI to drive the power or context of the written word, right? Ultimately, the whole point of that is in order for Google to train a model to rewrite titles, they need input factors, and H1s have become one of those driving input factors into the model that learns how to write a different title for a particular page. So that's why, to answer your first question, that's why. Now, whether that's going to work or what we should be doing from an SEO community, that's a different answer. First and foremost, we need to just be now more mindful about what our H1s are. I think in the past we've become very lazy or reluctant to like mess with H1s, or we have various heading structures that are just convoluted and messy and more deterministic of design than they are of what the purpose of the page is. And so we really need to go back to controlling that and working with our teams, working with our content teams, working with our dev teams to really focus and harness the utilization of an H1 for the intention of the purpose of the page. And I think that's what we should be doing as an SEO community in this transformative period where Google is trying to really figure out how to use this new input factor to drive the title in a SERP. That was a lot, and I hope that that was helpful.
Yeah, very interesting. So just to recap, and let me know if I get this right. H1's always been important, right? Because it's basically your title tag for your content on the page. It defines what the page is about. You always want it to be different than the title tag. You want it to be usually a little bit more concise, but not just necessarily a keyword. And Google is utilizing H1 tags right now to rewrite the titles in the SERPs themselves, right? I've also
Yep.
found that like sometimes just using keyword divider and then like some words in the title, the keyword and the divider, like keyword dash or keyword pipe, has been taken out, right? Because
Yeah.
I don't think at the end of the day, Google just wants a list of results that are all keywords. I think the intention is for people to have different types of results and to read them and things like that. So, but the H1s become more important there. And then one of the things is like to in the past, and I see this quite a lot, especially with blogs and publications, is that sometimes H1s, H2s, and H3s will be used very freely when writing, right? I want to use these H2s as these subheaders. I want to exemplify a point. Therefore, I'm going to use an H2 to make this one word bigger, and the word is wow. So suddenly you have like a H2 or maybe even an H1 on the page that says wow. Or maybe your developers utilized H1s to say like in the code to say like, hey, this is where the footer goes or something like that. So your developers are using H1s like they would a comment tag in their coding. So really cleaning that up. And I would say just like with featured snippets, when Google taught us all how to write with statement, question statement, bullet, 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 question statement, bullet, bullet, bullet. Now Google's saying, hey, you know what? If your H1s aren't all together, you may have something misleading in the title tag or something wrong in the title tag. Do a better job of teaching us. Do a better job of teaching our AI. Make them better across the board. So for as many SEOs that are upset about this title thing, at the same time, it also gives you something new to sell, because now you can make sure the H1s are optimized across the site, and it's incredibly important at the end of the day. And by sell, I also mean by communicating that up to get approval to work on the project as well, because it's pretty huge at the end of the day, pretty huge. Jordan, we're out of time.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you so much for dropping in today. Really appreciate the knowledge drop, kind of, getting a reset in terms of where we are. We're done or almost done with this summer of updates. Do you remember a time in SEO history where there's been so much going on at once?
I'm dizzy. I'm like literally, I have like vertigo. It's just insane.
I know. Whoa, what's going on here? It's happening here. It's happening there. And it used to be when there was an update, you could say, here's where we were before this specific update, and this is what happened as a result of this specific update. But when there's 5 of them happening at once, it's a little bit more difficult to do that. So thank you for helping us all hit the reset button here with this update. So just to let all of you know, if your questions did not get answered, we're going to be sending them over to Jordan and the Search Metrics team to look at, get back to you, and we will include some of those answers in the recap. And as a reminder, the video and the deck should be available after today's webinar itself for all registrants, or for those of you who had to drop off a little bit earlier. Speaking of SEJ webinars, our next webinar is going to be on Wednesday, September 15th, in a week, on how to scale and grow your enterprise technical SEO strategy, brought to you by Rock Content. So go ahead and make sure you sign up there. And when we're done with today's webinar, there's going to be a quick survey. Please take the time to fill it out. Those help us all make our presentations better and give you much more educational material at the end of the day. Jordan, again, it's been a pleasure. Anything you'd like to say before we sign off on behalf of yourself or behalf of Search Metrics?
No, I just want to say thank you, Lauren, for hosting us, and I hope that everyone gained a little something out of the presentation. And feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn or Twitter if you have any other questions. I'm always available, doors open.
Awesome. And just to everybody who's still there, as a reminder, in the chat box, we dropped links to the Google AI blog on T5 that Jordan had referenced quite a bit. A piece, or more so a podcast, hosted on the Search Metrics site, all about MUM and the AI algorithm, hosted by Jordan. And then also a little bit about Quora ads, which I'm going to check out after this for testing click and intent at the end of the day. So I really like that tip. I really like that tip.
Awesome.
So yeah, non-solicited plug for Quora there.
Right.
So,
it is.
Again, thank you, Jordan Cooney, and thank you to the team at Search Metrics for coming in and sponsoring this webinar today. Any other questions you have, please feel free to drop them. We'll send them over to Jordan. And on that note, we're going to be signing off. So thank you, everyone.